Hi, everybody. Uh, Welcome to Socialist Social Club's panel, Why Can't the Democrats Stop Trump? My name is Boris. I'm a co-organizer with Socialist Social Club. Um, you can find out more about us on our website, socialistsocialclub.org. We've got information about the club. We've got a Google Calendar on there so you can see all our events. You can sign up for our newsletter on the website. We also have a newsletter sign-up form up at the front. If you want to put down your email. We also have a donation box up there. We use those donations to cover events like this materials and supplies, and put on more events in the future. So if you have anything to spare, we'd certainly appreciate it. There's water on the table over there if you need some. There's programs over there if you haven't grabbed one yet. And the program has a link to a survey on the back if you have any thoughts on the panel afterwards. We'd love to hear how we can make this, more fun, more useful, more interesting for you. Bathrooms are in this corner back here. This door to the bathrooms is locked. The library didn't unlock it, so you just have to walk around into the library, and the bathrooms are right there. The doors are a little weird. You have to, when you walk in, you have to close the door and then press a button on the wall that says lock. So just heads up. If you have any questions or need any help or anything comes up, you can ask Emily sitting by the front or Brian, the tall gentleman in the black shirt back here. They're also helping organize, so feel free to talk to them with anything you need. Last but not least, I want to thank the Golden Valley Library for giving us this space. Hopefully in the future, more spaces like this will exist. So I'll introduce our panelists in a moment and explain the panel format real quick. I just did want to let everybody know that we are audio recording this panel to post on YouTube at a later time and maybe other podcast services as well. So just during the Q&A, be aware of that, if you have any concerns about that. The panel format will be as follows. Each of our panelists will have 8 minutes to answer our question. Then each of them will then have a subsequent 2 minutes to respond to each other. And then we will go to Q&A after a short break. The Q&A will just be free form. You just raise your hand. I'll walk over to you with the mic, and then you'll be able to ask your question. We ask that you ask questions of the panel. You do not give your opinion on the state of the world. There is, in fact, a social hour after at 5 at New Bohemia, just down the road from here. We can get you the address if you need it, but it's also on the event, and I think I put it on the program. I might be wrong about that, but we can get you the address no matter what. So if you did have other things you wanted to talk about at greater length, we invite you to come to the social afterwards. So on to the panel itself. Our panelists today are Emmett from Black Hat Workers Collective, Kip with Democratic Socialists of America, and Laura with General Strike Committee. Emmett is a member of Black Hat Workers Collective. He's a union carpenter with a history as a deckhand and farm worker, and is a musician focusing on protest folk music. His time as an activist has been spent organizing on the shop floor and in solidarity networks, doing legal defense work for prisoners, cop watching, and conducting community self-defense. Black Hat Workers Collective is a network of union rank-and-file members and elected officers committed to growing the class struggle, awakening new militancy in our labor movement, defending and deepening internal democracy within the movement, and spreading a revolutionary analysis and culture within labor. They advocate direct action prefiguration, or, quote, building a new world in the shell of the old. Kip Hedges is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. He has most recently been deeply involved in the Delta Airlines baggage handler union organizing campaign, where he was a ramp worker for 30 years. He has been centrally involved with the $15 minimum wage campaign at MSP Airport. He is co-chair of DSA's National Labor Commission Workers Organizing Workers Committee, where they assist people with getting hired at places like Amazon, Delta, and UPS to help organize. He's also leader of a new caucus in DSA called Workers Resist, who aim to make DSA more welcoming and accessible to frontline workers. DSA is a socialist organization of 90,000 members in every state in the U.S. They were key to getting Zoran Mamdani, one of their members, elected to mayor of New York. DSA is a big tent organization with members ranging from revolutionary socialists to those who are dedicated to slow reform, electoralism, and incremental change. They believe their Big Tent approach helps to make DSA more powerful and democratic. They want to build a multiracial working class power to get rid of capitalism. Laura is with the General Strike Committee. She's a farmer and food justice organizer in the Twin Cities. She runs a farmer's market and helped found a collaborative that operates communal gardens in St. Paul with a weekly summer produce giveaway. She joined General Strike in 2024 and was one of Minnesota's first chapter facilitators. General Strike Committee is a decentralized strike network of committed people who want to bring back their sense of community and build a world for humans, not corporations. They've taken on the task of organizing their collective resistance, helping shift their time, energy, and money away from upholding colonial capitalism and U.S. imperialism. And our prompt for this panel that the panelists will answer is the following. Donald Trump recently said that he expected the Democrats to put up more of a fight against him, but that he's faced no resistance to his policies. Just this past week, 8 Democrats agreed to vote to end the shutdown for an empty promise that the Republicans have already said they wouldn't honor. So we asked the panelists to answer the following. Why can't the Democrats seem to do anything about Trump? What can we actually do about the rise of right-wing populism in America? And what options are there for people disaffected with the Democratic Party? Emmett.
Testing. All right. Oh, it's a pleasure to speak to you all. The revolutionary anarchist Buenaventura Durruti, while fighting against the fascist coup in Spain in the 1930s, said, "No government fights fascism to destroy it. The bourgeoisie sees that power is slipping out of their hands. They bring up fascism to hold on to their privileges." Now, that formula worked very well in Europe in the 1930s as the continent and much of the world stood at the knife's edge of revolution. In America today, we have an echo, not a repetition of the past, as is so often the case, first as tragedy, then as farce. The capture of the Republican Party by its wing of ultranationalists and nativists, Christian theocrats on the far right, is not a response to an existential threat of revolution threatening capitalism itself. Rather, it is the latest act in a decades-long neoliberal push against popular power and concessions made in preceding decades of struggle, in which both parties have been active in pushing back those concessions. It is also a reaction of rage against the social movements of the last decades, queer liberation, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the mainstreaming of intersectional discourse and analysis, and the rebirth of a working-class movement between Occupy and the rise of the new left, which those of us in this room largely, compose as a movement. The Democratic Party has not fought the rise of this fascist wing as if it were an existential threat. Actually, I heard during the first Trump administration someone quip that everyone is saying that Trump is a fascist, but the anarchists are the only ones acting as if that's true. No judgment to the socialists in the room. I remember some of you there as well. After briefly regaining power from 2020 to 24, the Democrats pursued charges against some of the foot soldiers of the putsch attempt of J6, while only really half-heartedly pursuing its architects in the name of a return to normalcy and bipartisanship. They have, at every turn, trusted America's institutions to arrest the growth of authoritarianism, even as those institutions are violated over and over. Uniting under the ethos, nothing will fundamentally change, they have pushed back against every attempt by the left base of their party to put forward a compelling political vision capable of combating fascism. But the fascism that we're seeing today grows from the same American values and institutions which the Democratic Party's centrist ruling layer embraces. This is not some foreign invasive weed that the Russians planted here that is suddenly coming up through our green fields of American democracy. This is homegrown, as fascism has always been. Even fascism in the 30s looked to America as its example and as a place to learn from, because fascism is the logic of colonialism, and we are a colonial country. It is a reaction to movements which the Democratic Party officials themselves were very involved in combating or co-opting. And this is something that the right often misses when they discuss social movements. They think that the Democrats and the protesters are all on the same side. Those of us being beaten by cops whose departments are overseen by Democratic administrations are quite aware that that is not, in fact, the case. So the Democrats are not able to resist Trump, both because it is not really in their interest to do so, except to some degree, and because as a party of institutional legitimacy rather than a mass mobilization, it's not even really in their power to do so. And I want to get into a couple of reasons why. So first, for the ruling class, Trump is both a danger and a blessing. Now, traditionally, the American ruling class has governed through this bipartisan system, balancing and negotiating between the interests of different lobbies and donors. And this system allows them to have sort of the whole ruling class of America bought into this system. If you have a system in which only a clique of the ruling class is bought in, you're always going to have people outside of that clique who are trying to get into power and having various conspiracies and palace coups. As, for example, is often the case in the halls of power in Moscow, not so much the halls of power in London or the US. It's a more effective way to rule a country as a ruling class to keep capitalism stable. And they even incorporate groups from the rank and file, from the masses, social groups, ethnic communities, women's advocacy groups are also part of this machine, because that allows then the ruling class to offer concessions that can stabilize the system rather than allowing problems to fester to the point that they explode and collapse the system, as nearly happened in the 1960s, which is a large part of why the Democratic Party began a process of incorporating those groups into them in order to co-opt them. And this is something the Democratic Party has done through the labor movement. It's done through the civil rights movements. It's kind of the MO of how the Democratic Party operates. Now, the party system has been reinvented several times in American history as old social forces push their way into having a seat in power and old social forces kind of dissolve. What we've seen is that since the 1980s, the old New Deal era coalition that made up the Democratic Party during the 50s through the 70s has broken up. And during the post-war years, we saw a period of labor peace under which the disruptive insurrectionary strikes of the 1910s and 30s were replaced with this orderly management-labor partnership and some shared prosperity for the working middle classes, which then led to the long 60s and this period of intense social struggle by marginalized groups of people, especially black people and women, who were left out of that sort of new social peace that was forged in the 40s around labor. And throughout all of this, the role of the Democrats in realigning has been to tail the Republicans as the Republicans drift to the right, while keeping the votes of these marginalized communities and labor secure within their coalition, but offering them as little as possible. And that's kind of been the formula since the Clinton Democrats and the New Deal. And we've seen a little bit of pushback to that, even within the upper halls of the Democrats lately, but it's still pretty firmly controlled by the centrists. And because that centrist third way Democrat coalition has been leading the party since about the 80s, and I would argue even since the late 70s, because a lot of this started under Carter. What we actually see is that a lot of what Trump is doing is building on groundworks that the Democrats themselves have helped put in place. So, for example, Obama deported more people than any other president and continued growing ICE. He initiated the family detention policy, and the kids remained in cages under Biden. Biden continued Trump-era policies like stopping asylum seekers from seeking asylum in the U.S. unless they'd applied to every country they'd gone through before then, separating families, using state and local police to assist ICE. He continued to construct the border wall, which has been a decades-long bipartisan project. The Obama administration actually wrote the list of the 7 Muslim countries that Trump banned travel from. And so, as we can just see, there's been this long pattern of the Democrats actually largely supporting a lot of what we're now seeing as Trump's agenda. And as long as they're able to do that while not having to actually pull the trigger on those policies themselves, they're in a really cozy position, because they can continue taking all of our votes for granted and claiming to be the opposition while also having their donors quite pleased that all these very pro-corporate sort of policies are running through. And then hopefully they think they'll get power back. Essentially, the reason that they can't fight is because as a party, their whole shtick is demobilizing social movements. They've spent decades doing that. They don't know how to reverse and actually mobilize the social movements or how to fight outside of the institutions of American governance. And they, frankly, most of them wouldn't want to, at least the leadership. So I do think that there is a possibility for us to fight back, but it's going to be largely outside of the Democratic Party, the institutions, and through social movements. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to start in 10 years ago, in 1915, 2015, not 110 years ago, although I was probably alive then. right in the middle of World War I. Boy, that was a rough one. So 2015, I was very, very involved in the Fight for 15 at MSP Airport. And we made a good run at it. We organized workers, literally thousands of workers, to sign a petition to go to the Metropolitan Airport Commission and did demonstrations and rallies. But in the end, we just weren't quite strong enough to push that over at that point. However, we did get a lot of attention during the course of this from the union movement throughout the Twin Cities, who finally agreed that they thought, imagine that it would take a fight to get the unions, most of them, to agree to fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage. Now, I just have to say that in this fight, I was not a naive person in 2015. I thought that I pretty well understood how society worked and how the ruling class worked. But I was really shocked. I was shocked by the fact that, well, go to Minneapolis City Council, they're all Democrats, lots of them are very liberal. There should be no problem with a $15 an hour minimum wage for the city of Minneapolis, right? Boy, was I wrong. Even people like Lisa Bender, who became the president of the city council, very liberal, showed up to a 15 now rally and gave $1,000. During the course of the fight, she, in all her liberalism, was swayed to not support a $15 an hour minimum wage. And Jacob Frey was also at a that same 15 rally and gave $50 and said, I'm for this, I'm just not sure how much. And what became clear in meetings with people like Jacob Frey as a city council member was that he was worshiping a different God than I was. And I mean, as in the gods of Minnetonka, who are the ones, the very, very wealthy people in the mansions in Deep Haven, Minnetonka, etc., who determine the politics of the entire state and beyond. And they have a million ways of pulling those levers. In discussions with Jacob Frey, he explained, guys, you just don't understand how difficult this is. I was sitting in a city council meeting where I was sitting right next to a guy dressed to the nines who was typing away. And I thought, who is this guy? And as I read his thing, I realized that he was part of the Downtown Council, which is a business panel for Minneapolis. And when he got up to leave, he looked at Jacob Frey and he went like this. And Jacob went, yeah, okay, good. And I realized that I was sitting next to Satan, and that this is how it works. They also have transmission belts into our movement because Take Action Minnesota, which is a very liberal nonprofit involved in all sorts of different social movements, refused to support a $15 an hour minimum wage until victory was assured. And then they came in on it. And all of that pressure came from Minnetonka, from or whatever rich town you want to name, to get unions, not liberal nonprofits, Democratic Party politicians not to support a $15 an hour minimum wage. So Democrats, the DFL included, the liberal DFL, is very invested in being business friendly because so much of their power, so much of their media, so much of their money comes from very rich people from all around the Twin Cities and beyond. Now, let's fast forward to New York. 2025. Zoran Mondami, who I think even if you're not into electoral politics, you have to recognize that the working class, by and large, of New York City was mobilized around a set of 5 important demands around the cost of living, like fast free buses, $30 an hour minimum wage, free child care, municipal grocery stores, and freeze the rent. Very, very popular in New York. And so the imagination of the working class was awakened by Zoran Mamdani. And he went from 1% of the vote in the polls to winning with more than 50% in a 3-way race, which is quite significant, especially since the entire ruling class, with a few minor exceptions, threw their weight behind a disgraced, disgusting Democratic Party politician in Cuomo. So the Democratic Party in New York State, which is big and powerful, had every opportunity to do something new, to travel this path instead of this path. Because I think it was Leon Trotsky who said that liberals paved the way to fascism. And I think we can see that pretty clearly in what's going on right now. So the Democrats had a chance to do something very different, and they did not. The reason why they didn't is exactly the same equation that happened with the fight for 15, which is there's all of their money. I mean, the liberal establishment in New York includes people who are very rich and very powerful, make a lot of money from real estate, they make a lot of money from investment, etc. So the last thing they wanted to see happen was get a mayor elected who was for freezing the rent, because that's lots of money out of their pocket. So very concrete why they didn't support Zoran, that is the path to stopping fascism, not the electoral part of it, but the part of bold, clear demands that mobilize the working class, because that will be the next chapter in this. Does that happen or not? Is the working class in New York mobilized to fight for these 5 bold demands? And I'll stop there.
So, hi. These well-spoken individuals before me have said so much about why the Democratic Party can't stop Trump. And I'm particularly interested in the second half of this question, which is, what can we actually do? And that's part of what drove me to be part of the general strike, and that we are all, obviously disaffected. We're disillusioned. We have been led to believe that there are these avenues where we can have our voices heard, we can be involved in the way that the country runs, and it's very clear that they are maybe an illusion at best, could be a lot worse and more nefarious. But I think that what we can do about the rise of this right-wing populism, when I saw the word, I thought, okay, I personally want to unpack some of these terms that we're using when we're talking about things, because populism itself has a lot of nuance to it. And there are things about us that want change, that can say things that would be populist in nature. There's populism everywhere. I think the toxic element of populism is the us versus them mentality that's kind of intrinsic to the way that the right-wing populism is showing up right now. And I try to remind myself and my co-organizers that this is more of an us versus us situation. We are all part of this country together, and we have to find a way to govern it in a way that's fair for everyone. And we have lots of different ideas about it. And at General Strike, we also have, internal issues. Every organization does. Every grouping of people trying to do good work together can have trouble. But I think that if we can make the fight more personal and work on ourselves, look at our own kind of internalized capitalism in the ways that, white folks have been raised to uphold white supremacy culture, and that we judge ourselves, we judge our communities, we judge other people based on these characteristics of white supremacy culture that exist in the fabric of America, that if you're not familiar with those characteristics, there's a website. If you search white supremacy culture, it really explain a lot to you. And I think there's some beautiful art to it as well. It's excellent. But what can be done, I think, is to take control of our personal impact on whatever political things are going on. I'm a member of the Farmers Union, and we went to the Capitol to talk with, lawmakers, and we went into a really fancy room, and I got scared just walking in. It was too fancy for me. There were 2 security guards at the door, and I just spun right around and went out. I was like, this is fine. I don't need to be part of this. There's plenty of other people here. And one of the security guards stopped me and said, can I ask what's going on with you? Are you okay? And I was like, I don't feel like I belong here, actually. And he said, this is yours. You belong here. This belongs to you. And that got me into that room and part of that conversation. And I thought, I think a lot of us are not acting with the amount of authority and entitlement that we deserve because we have been disenfranchised by the world that we have right now. And that to operate with this kind of entitlement that can come with the fact that this is our country and we have control over what we do in it, whether it's picking up trash on the street, because it is clearly no one else's job, especially now. Those of us who thought that someone else would take care of these things are probably having a crisis because we thought that this was more put together than it is. And I think that's actually motivating for me to say, what can I do right now with what I have and make a difference, whether it's just, handing some money to someone who needs it. No, I'm not rich. No, I don't have extra, but I know how it is to need $5 when you don't have $5. And it can be that small. And that, to me, I think is more motivating than looking outside at these huge systems of long-standing issues that feel really hard to address. And I think that's why I love General Strike, not to be pushing that on you, but I think that the Democrats can't seem to do anything about Trump because they're all part of the same machine together, And I think the individual desire for wealth and position in society can really kind of cause problems. You're not willing to sacrifice, and that it causes me to think, what can I sacrifice if I'm not necessarily in these, important positions, but kind of working on my own ability to show up for my fellow humans, because we really are suffering together right now. And that's one, I guess, positive that's coming out of this, is that a lot of the separations that we were feeling are kind of breaking down, that we're not, those of us who have been affluent and a little bit protected from the difficulties that have existed for a lot of Americans forever, are finally seeing and experiencing them for themselves, and that's motivating. So I think we can really come together as people and say, you know what, we can just do this ourselves. And I don't know what there's probably more time. I'm not a talker. I'm a doer for sure. So if I can be done now. Okay, thanks.
Now each of our panelists will have 2 minutes to respond to what the other panelists said.
Well, there's not a whole lot of disagreement, I think, between us, so I won't be engaging in much of a polemic here. I will say I think that it's very important to understand that throughout American history, usually when we've had progressive social change, it has not come from those in office, but it's come from those in the streets. And it often doesn't matter that much who's actually in office if your movements are strong enough. For example, we could say that FDR was this great progressive president. Well, to a degree, but he was responding to both immediately within his presidency years of intense insurrectionary strikes happening across different American cities, as well as a very radical farmers movement and other movements at that time, and a world atmosphere of being on the knife's edge of revolution. But I think an even more stark example would be if you look back at most of our environmental regulations, they came around under the Nixon administration. Nixon is not an environmentalist. He did not run as an environmentalist, but there was a massive movement at that time demanding those changes. So I think that we need to not only build campaigns around specific issues and win them, but I think that in the process of building our movements, we need to have a real eye towards building institutions that create lasting power. That would be democratic unions and reform caucuses within our unions. It would be tenant unions, various forms of community self-defense, cop watch groups, prisoner support. One thing that we need to understand is that our social movements will come under state repression, and we need to preemptively organize ways to defend our movements. And I'm not going to say that electoralism is completely unimportant, but I do think that it is, generally speaking, downstream of movement building and reflects the power built through movement building, although sometimes it can help crystallize consciousness. And that's essentially my position as the anarchist on the panel today. Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm going to sound like another anarchist on the panel, because I agree with that analysis of electoralism 100%. The other thing that I would say is, because inherent in what Emmett was saying, is the idea of movements that are democratically controlled by those who are involved in those movements. And that's really a core value of, well, anarchism, revolutionary socialism, that is all about bottom up. And that's where we draw our power from. There's a real tendency in the union movement and in social movements or nonprofit, liberal nonprofits like Take Action. We're the experts. We know the best thing. We have the skills. You people should just sort of stay out of it. Meaning people like Emmett, who's a union carpenter, right? Still, okay. Retired baggage handler, farmer. Just stay the fuck out of it. We know what to do, and we have to powerfully fight against that tendency. The other thing that we have to fight against is we're going to come under enormous pressure, which Emmett alluded to, by the repressive forces of the capitalist state. And you can already see what that looks like people disappearing off the street, just, like being able to shoot people at will, etc. That's going to put a lot of pressure on us. And I know from having been involved in the union movement that one of the boss's favorite techniques is unrelenting pressure. Just pressure, pressure, pressure until you crack and make a mistake. And I'll finish up. But the key for us is to be comradely or have a culture of solidarity when meeting these challenges, like, Laura, you're terrible because you think what you do. I need to crush you. That kind of attitude in our movements gets you nowhere. What does is real deep democratic discussion and the ability to synthesize ideas and then move forward.
I totally agree with your use of the word solidarity. That's very important to me. I think that you both have such excellent points that are very well thought out and well researched, that since we're responding to each other, I just want to thank you both. And as the third potential anarchist on this panel, maybe we're the anarchist social club today, because my whole idea of like just do it yourself feels pretty anarchist most of the time. So I just think that the more coalition building we can do between us, we have a lot more in common than we think, and all of our different groups are doing amazing things. So.
Okay, we're going to start up the Q&A. We'll just carry it through until 4 o'clock. So I'll just ask for hands, and I'll pick people kind of at random. Wave your hand if I'm looking the other way, and I'll notice you eventually. I'm just going to kind of go in random order. Like I said, please, I ask that you ask questions of the panel. Obviously, you can preface it with some, contextual remarks, but in general, we want to hear what the panelists have to say. And we can have a much longer, more engaged discussion at the social afterwards. So here we go. Got our first one.
Hi, I have a question for Laura. I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about like the General Strike Committee, and kind of like how the organization reaches out and like how often like you're trying. The purpose of the strike is, like what the goal of the strike would be, and how you're trying to organize various different like businesses or different types of workers into it, because I know we have like union representation here. I work in retail, which very typically doesn't have union involvement. They don't think that we're people. Retail, not unions.
Yeah.
To be clear, maybe both, depending. So I just would like to learn more about like what the General Strike Committee's like goals are and kind of like what the overarching plan loosely might look like.
Yeah. That I'm so glad that you asked, and we're here for people just like you. I mean, we're kind of unions have this supportive structure that can support people through a strike, and if we were to call a general strike, there are a lot of us that are not members of unions that would need some sort of, supportive network that could help us meet our needs, especially like these guys were saying, if it's going to be, if they're going to try to repress our movement, there may be some shitty stuff going on to try to stop us from our strike. So I think there's a few different like avenues that we're approaching. One is kind of organize people who are not part of unions and getting us together in, we have a Discord channel that is a national conversation, and we've also got our chapters that can deal with each other. So state level, we're trying to really build networks of mutual aid primarily, because I think we as a chapter agreed that that's kind of the most urgent, the survival issue is the most urgent if we were to call a strike. So I know nationally we're gathering signatures with people. People have differing views on, putting their name on a list. So we kind of assume that a lot of people are still interested in striking, even if they're not on the strike card. But there is some research that says that if like 3.5% of the population of America were to go on strike, which we think of strike as kind of removing our participation from the economic structure. So whether it's our labor or our consumption, it looks different for every individual, because if you are chronically ill and can't stop consuming certain things, but maybe you can stop consuming other things, or if you're not working, you obviously are already on strike and you could maybe support other people. So we're trying to figure out how it would look to have a strike, and then also put together what we need to call a strike, which is kind of an organized group of us talking to each other to say, when is it going to be time? And there have been lots of conversations where we're like, this is pretty bad, it seems like time, but then it just keeps getting worse. So now we're not really sure. I know our chapter is dealing with 5051 as well right now. We're trying to kind of bring our chapters together to figure out, because they've got a good impact and reach, that we really just want to make the most effective in our unique places. So we are very decentralized, because it's kind of human level up, where it's like, I feel like you had more to your question that I haven't addressed yet. Okay. Did I? Okay, great. That's the most important part to me. Thanks.
Kip or Emmett, if you have anything to say to that, or
I'm going to add a couple of real quick things. One is that just in two thoughts in terms of general strike. One is probably not waiting till 2028. It's coming at us pretty hard and fast. Like, imagine Trump realizes there's no way that they're going to hold on to both houses of Congress, so martial law, elections canceled, Antifa has taken over, and we need military force and repression. You can easily, a year ago, that was a hard sell, not now. So it may not wait. So time is of the essence. The other thing is, we got a big problem in that if you're going to have a general strike, it's going to have the support of millions of people from the ground up. And the unions will have to lead it. The unions are not in a good position to do that. They're very weak. They're very bureaucratic. Look at the American Federation of Government Employees that just got absolutely destroyed, literally, and they didn't lift a finger. They didn't lift a finger. So, and some of the unions that people think of as progressive really are more, they're like labor liberal. They are not about mobilizing their rank and file. They're about top down. And I see that all the time. I see that in the union that I've been associated with, the machinists union, for for a while, and they suck. So there's going to have to be a transformative process in the unions as well for this. But big enough events can sweep all sorts of things aside and bring in new tides. So I think that's what we're going to be looking at.
Form of mass resistance that's going to emerge in the coming years will probably be fairly unpredictable in the way that it was during the first Trump administration. For example, I don't think any of us expected the uprising in 2020 to happen. Even after I saw the tape, I didn't expect it to happen. I went down there to distribute water, and next thing I knew, it was a couple hours later, and we were in an uprising. And I was using the water to get tear gas out of people's eyes. It was escalated quickly. So I think that it's unlikely that we'll see kind of a neat timetable, but that's the norm throughout history for basically every uprising. There's almost never an uprising that manages to not go off half-cocked. That's just the nature of the beast when you're trying to organize against a very well-oiled state machine and you are coming from below. I do think that we can see militancy coming from both inside and outside of the labor movement. There's going to need to be struggles within the labor movement. And there's also, I think, a lot of energy from workers who aren't part of the official labor movement. I would say Day Without an Immigrants has been a really good example of how workers who are not officially organized can take action that is militant and often more militant than would be allowed by our unions. For example, my own union is unlikely to endorse a general strike at any time in the near future. To put it mildly. I also think that we'll likely see, if we get some kind of mass civil rupture against the Trump administration, that the strike might be one of the tactics that ends up being used, but that much like in 2020, we might see urban uprisings bubble up spontaneously. Not that anyone in this room is planning that. And I think we should also not discount occupations as a tactic, especially when we saw in the Arab Spring the power of having occupations in major places or at hubs of industry with a strong, simple demand, such as the people demand the fall of the regime. Thank you.
All right, we had a question back here, and then we'll go there and then there.
Thank you. Can you hear this? My name's Cynthia, and I'm a member of DSA. I was going to ask a question that Kip kind of answered about pulling in this. Most people probably know that Sean Fain, CTU, Sarah Nelson have been calling for a general strike and gathering labor leaders from across the country to figure out how they can work together across sectors to pull off a general strike in 2028. I'm a member of SPFE. My union's leadership, meaning my union's president and a lot of staff, went to that meeting have been involved in that, in participating in that alongside Minneapolis Teachers Union and SEIU Local 26 and other so-called progressive unions in the cities. And Kip's description of these unions, if you read in these times, you'll see that we have something in Minneapolis called the Minnesota Miracle that happened in 2024 when everybody aligned their contracts around common good demands. And we are just, Minneapolis, St. Paul are a shining example of how we can win this fight in labor. And any of us who participate in it, some of us in this room were at the solidarity table for that 2024 strike and know what a load of crap that story is, and I wonder who that serves. So my question is no longer about the general strike and how do we parse kind of what's happening with 2028, the official 2028, and the general strike push that I think the 2028 push is a kind of good excuse for radical unions or class struggle unionists in their union to get strike ready for the general strike when it comes, using the kind of official cover of our unions that are participating. But I don't think they really want to go on a general strike. I think they have this idea that will somehow align contracts again. Doesn't work for any of the teachers unions who are in NEA or AFT. But my question is about the Democratic Party again and its association with conservatism and basically their, in bedness with the ruling class nationally. And to what extent do we need to be really wary of, to what extent can we work with the mainstream labor liberal unions? I think that's a real question for us because they're so bought into the Democratic Party.
Whichever one of you wants to take that first.
Well, yeah, as regards to the Democratic Party, and I'll get to the role of the unions within this just a moment, but I think that we have to recognize that because America has this first past the post voting system, there's a lot less room in our political system for class independent political organizations to exist and to vie for power electorally. We do see that in some of our local cities, especially. We have the ability on the local level in solidly blue areas to get people from outside of the Democratic machine elected. And I think that is to our advantage to wage those local fights. In terms of the Democratic Party itself, I think we should be very wary, and I do think that there's a possibility for a split within the ruling class around Trumpism. There's a section of the ruling class that's going to want to get their power back because wealthy people don't like it when they don't get to govern the country they live in. And right now they're accepting clique rule, but at some point they're going to get tired of that. And when that happens, it's very likely that those titans of industry, as Kamala Harris called them, as she was depending on them to come to the rescue of American democracy, will try to put themselves at the head of our institution, at the head of our movements. You have your Gavin Newsoms and your Hakeem Jeffries and people like that, but also the billionaires behind them who will, try to sort of co-opt the movement and make themselves the leadership. Within the sort of labor liberal unions, I think that it is inevitable that we're going to have to fight those officials. Our labor movement has been slowly stewarded into its grave for decades by people who have no willingness or interest in any kind of militant fight and who are often there because becoming a labor official is the best way to not have to wear your bags. And those people need to get the fuck out of the way and let the rank and file take over and let us build a militant labor movement again. And there's going to be a fight, and it's inevitable, and we must win it.
Okay. I think one of the things that you alluded to is the extraordinary fragility of the capitalist system right now. This is, just in terms of, but like I've been alive for quite a while, this is probably the most fragile that I've ever seen the capitalist system, both worldwide and in the United States. And the fact that part of the United States ruling class has had to revert to, as Emmett put it, clique rule, is kind of extraordinary. And one of the things that means, exactly as you pointed out, is you could be sucking up to Trump one day and the next day find yourself out of favor. I just read about Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's not exactly a shining example of revolutionary spirit or humanitarianism or anything, who is now out. She is out, like Trump has thrown her out. And it's around the Epstein thing because, her and some of the other conservative Republican women say, we're not backing down on this because we're women and many of us have experienced personal sexual abuse, so we will not back down. They're all gone. I mean, they will be crushed by Trump. And that's a pretty big fracture. And there will be more fractures. There will be fractures with people in Silicon Valley as they lose favor with Trump. And all of those fractures are openings for us if we have our shit together, And there was some, oh, labor liberals, yes. That it is very true that those of us in the unions will have to confront that, but the terrain for that is getting better for our side. And it is very true that most of these officials and staffers, I mean, like, I was elected, this was 15 years ago. I was elected to a national position in the machinists union. And now remember, 15 years earlier with inflation. So I started out we lost our election for our union, so we lost the union. I lost my position. But I started out at $90,000 a year. And if I had stayed in for all 4 years, I would have gone to $150,000. And when I retired, I would have gotten a special pension from the union of potentially $3,000 a month, which is more than a lot of human beings make by far in a month of work. So it's very lucrative and so you don't want to rock the boat because you want that pension. You want to make 150, then 200, then 250,000, and people think you're important. Like, hey, look at me, I'm a something or other. So it's attractive for a lot of these leaders not to buck the system, but the time is running out on them. That's what I would say, given what we're facing.
I think it's interesting what you were explaining about the unions working together, because we've been having an internal conversation at General Strike that since we are considered a wildcat strike because we don't have union affiliation, unions won't talk to us or work with us because it puts them at risk. And I wonder if there is an opportunity there where unions could work together. And I mean, all of it is maybe potentially a little bit performative, but that's where I would hope that the people in those rooms, people like you, would be taking them to task and saying, like, no, we're not going to let you pretend your way through this. Like, we want this and we need this, and we're going to fight for it as the members of your union, because those of us on the outside, too, doing our own kind of non-union strike organizing, if we were to be able to collectively, like, y'all could talk to each other, do the union, and of course it's built this way, like we've all talked about, that all of those silos are made to keep us from each other and to keep us from our power. So if the unions can somehow work together under this potential general strike, and then just, we would be supportive as the general strike to say, like, we're having meetings with those folks in Illinois, our Illinois chapters, leading the charge on that. But we have a call, I think, on the 22nd. If anyone joins our Discord, you'll be able to see it. I don't know the details, but that we're trying to be part of that conversation to the point that we can, and that we're limited to based on the union's limitations, which was, new to me because I didn't realize it. But I think there is hope there, even though you have some understandable skepticism about it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I want to talk to you after. But I was at a training last weekend, and I'm sure you've heard of this. An alternative is out-of-board elections. When you are dechartered, we'll talk about it. But I'm very interested in this question, because we should be able to go to our union leadership and say, like, first of all, there's no such thing as a illegal strike, just an unsuccessful one. And this is what you do if you lose your charter. We're apt to lose our charter anyway, and it's our union.
Next question.
Hello, my name is Jessica Garraway. I'm in my early 30s now, and I was activated around 1920. So I was very active in the movements of the 2000 teens, the major ones, so Occupy, Black Lives Matter, Standing Rock. And while I think those movements did a lot to change the consciousness of the American populace and these movements built upon each other. One of the major failures I feel from those movements is the not building lasting institutions and structures for the working class to join and fight. So I believe in decentralized organizing, but that doesn't mean unorganized. I mean, we still need institutions. And so my question is, in the 2020s, we are in the age of Trump. What do our movements need to be doing, and what are our movements maybe already doing to not fall into that trap of the 2000 teens movements and creating lasting organizations to hold people and to direct our energies?
Fuck no.
All right, Kip, go ahead.
I think one of the things that, you're involved in it, and Emmett and I are both involved in it. It's called Workers' Solidarity Circle. Was that where you were leading? Which is a group of frontline workers, and by that I mean carpenters, baggage handlers, educators, nurses, hospital orderlies, etc. People who are up against the bosses on a regular basis. And so we are from a bunch of different political tendencies. We've worked together on occasion on different things over the years, and we finally decided, I think we have enough in common that we can kind of create some events together and then see where it leads, and really try to build a strong class struggle wing of the labor movement that stretches across the different unions. And that once we have that, that can be a very powerful lever to move unions in a more class struggle by class struggle. I mean, the boss is not your friend. We should use direct action, militant tactics, strikes, sit-down strikes, walkouts, etc. Even though only 10% of the population of the United States is in unions, it's a very powerful 10%. And you can see, like during the civil rights movement, black people were about 13% of the population of the United States, but they rocked it. I mean, they rocked the system absolutely to its core. So a smaller, a minority of the working class in the civil rights movement was almost all black workers. A working class movement, even if it's small, can have enormous power. So that's why we concentrate on frontline workers, on the unions, on the working class, because there's so much power there that's left on the table. So that's how we're trying to build something permanent where you don't have to be a socialist or an anarchist or a whateverist. You can be a worker who wants to use working class power to advance all of our own interests. That's one of the things I liked about Mamdani's campaign, is it kind of tapped into that. So that's one institution. Institutions like that are very important, and maybe we can model something that can be used across the country. Tenant unions, very important, and if you can make a connection between tenant unions, which are almost all workers, and the unions, very important. Making connections between environmental organizations, especially ones that are more bottom-up oriented, then you start to really talk about something. But you're right, it has to be democratic. There has to be opportunities to vote on things, to have democratic discussion, and then move forward. But that's like big. You can see it with George Floyd, man. I mean, there are millions of people in the street. No permanent institutions came out of that. And we are much weaker because of that, because the ruling class came back hard and there was not much structure there to actually resist.
Yeah, I think that it's very easy for social movements to fall into a pattern of reactive mobilization to whatever the most recent outrage is. And it doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a radical. It's easy to fall into this either way, right? Liberals can very easily have their like, okay, we're going to march from point A to point B because Trump, has cut another social program and, many people are going to suffer because of it. But that's not really going to necessarily do anything. And also, it's not necessarily going to make the people in that march be active participants in shaping the movement because they're just there for the day. Radicals can also fall into this trap. It's very easy, for example, if you're, say, an anti-fascist organization, hypothetically, to say there's a hate group coming to town and you're going to mobilize people to strongly disagree with them in a legal and constitutionally protected way, then you might find that you've mobilized people for that, but you haven't actually included them in the planning of that or really built up their own political awareness or, I think that people get politicized and grow politically through very direct participatory struggle, and not just as being a passive consumer and just going to a protest, but actually helping to form it. So I think that we need to have an organizing, not a mobilizing mindset. And there's a number of different things we can do to try to take our politics and find ways to create organizations that practice those politics day to day. So that we're not mobilizing, but we're actually picking fights and winning them. So for example, one thing that we actually did form out of the uprising, and it lasted a couple years, though it eventually petered down, was Whittier Cop Watch. And this was the idea that we're going to challenge the police state brutality by having patrols of people out in Whittier, most nights of the week. We're going to be a very visible presence doing cop watch, making sure that the police know that if they're in that neighborhood, and then we hope it would spread to other neighborhoods, that they are going to be under additional scrutiny that they are not used to being under, and that they will behave differently as a result of that. And then we had different discussions on what we would do if we did see them committing brutality, which is always a debate within cop watch circles. Similarly, DSA currently has the Street Corps, which does patrols, I think, like every night in different neighborhoods where they're doing outreach to unhoused people and then trying to do organizing among those people. We had back in the General Defense Committee in the 2010s, there was an organization called the Survivor Justice Working Group that was essentially an abolitionist group that dealt with cases of sexual violence in the community by actually asking the survivor what they wanted and then trying to figure out how to make that happen. So, for example, there was a manager who sexually assaulted a worker at a local cafe. That cafe ended up being picketed by a group of all survivors of sexual violence who were demanding that that manager get fired. Or they had marches against different frat houses that were known for committing sexual assault on people who went to parties. We can build union caucuses, democratizing our unions and pursuing more militant solutions to things on the job site. We can build solidarity networks for those of us who aren't in unions so that you have a group of people in your neighborhood who will just mutually back up each other in fights with your landlord or your boss. And even if you're not a worker at a workplace, if you're creative with your direct action, you can back up someone else at some other workplace through various things like phone zaps and banner drops. And at one point we catfished a boss. That was pretty fun. And, also things like prisoner support, letter writing, fundraising. There's all sorts of support movements that we need in the movement, and so often people want to jump to the front line, and it's super important to be a frontliner. It really is. But it's also important to have all that logistical support backing them up, and if we don't build that, we're going to continue seeing defeats, and we can't afford to have that happen. Also, a lot of the groups I mentioned, you may have noticed, a lot of them aren't around anymore. They collapse. When groups collapse, you need to maintain that institutional knowledge and either write it down or form another group and continue the work, or else the lessons die. And we can't afford to have lessons die, which brings me to my final point on this topic. We need to do intergenerational organizing really, really bad. We have a big tendency in our movements to kind of assume that everyone involved is like a young person in their 20s with no responsibilities or kids. And when we lose parents to our movement, that means we lose our most experienced organizers, and that is unacceptable. So we need to do things like childcare, providing food, and making sure that our spaces are welcoming to parents so that they can continue to be part of our movement and we're not constantly reinventing the wheel. Thanks.
I just want to add also valuing the contributions of older organizers that have been at it for decades, and I know that you also feel that way. But I think that our distrust of institutions also plays into our inability to organize institutionally, because it's hard to think that all you have to do is recreate institutions that exist. Sometimes we're creating things that don't exist at all yet, and I think that's an incredibly complex and like personal process. And also there's some ego that goes into people disbanding or groups failing, that there's a level of personal kind of exploration of like, how is my trauma showing up in this work, and what am I doing to kind of address the ways that I'm maybe being reactive. That like each of us sometimes will think that we are pure in our desire for a better world and our work, but we're all bringing baggage to the table, and sometimes the infighting within an organizational group will cause it to collapse. So I think having kind of this accountability structure and also a willingness to be creative. I mean, when you talk about 13% of the population rocking this country, I think that says a lot about the power of the institutions that did exist during that movement, like the Black Panther Party, that became a huge target. And what kind of a world would we have had they not targeted the Black Panther Party, and it could still be around in the way that it was then? I mean, I know that there are ways, but that we don't have institutions to look to that aren't oppressive systems right now. We need to create things kind of from scratch, and that is uncomfortable, and we don't know how. So like this kind of attitude of learning together and being accountable, I think, can go a long way. But I don't know. We're struggling through it as well.
Just one other thing to add, two things. One is I don't trust anybody over 40. I'll just tell you that right now. No, kidding, obviously. The one thing I want to mention is that electoral has its place, but it's not a very good way of building permanent power, especially when it's attached to the Democratic Party. I mean, we are going to at some point have to have a what people would call a political party, I think, that is deeply rooted in the working class and has a powerful working class program, but that is able to call people into the streets, not just for voting, but for protest, occupation, strike support, etc. And if that's not part of it, then it will not have a very useful lifespan.
Question over here, then the orange shirt, then over there.
Thanks. So this is mostly or first directed at Emmett. The uprising happened, and then it got essentially defanged by our democratic governance. And it seems that we have these flashes in the pan that then are able to be co-opted or successfully counterinsurgencyed by a combination of force and kind of sweet talking, if for lack of a better word, lying, promising, saying, we will address your concerns, so get out of the streets. How do we stop that from happening again with, because you were talking about we had strong labor actions in the 30s to the 60s. How do we stop? That's just a question.
Yeah, I think I won't know. I don't know if it's the best way, but the only way I know of, and it's kind of a difficult question. You know, we're in a type of country that's never really had the type of revolution we're looking for. There's not really a roadmap for how to do this in a Western liberal capitalist democracy that's also a settler colonial state. But I think that in terms of the uprising, a lot of what happened in the uprising was actually a result of people learning lessons from previous waves of resistance, as well as to the usual organizations whose job it is to co-opt resistance being caught flat-footed or disorganized. A lot of the activists who were around during the time of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile were no longer as organized and in charge of that movement, because the movement had kind of been put to bed. Like BLM had more or less been sort of inactive for a couple years at that point. Not totally, but like largely locally. And a lot of the people who were in the streets in 2020 allegedly were people who had been like teenagers in the Jamar Clark and Philando Castile struggles. And over the course of those struggles, I mean, people sometimes forget during Jamar Clark's struggle, right outside the 4th Precinct, there were fairly serious fractures happening within that movement, largely around the role of NGOs policing the activity of people and policing the tactics that people use. Like there were ongoing debates happening in the street under like less lethal round fire from the police as people were fighting the police. And that sort of debate within the movement, especially the use of this outside agitator narrative that was very common at the time, which was essentially saying that like all militancy and all resistance by black people is actually white anarchists, which was just obviously untrue because you could like see that people were resisting, whereas my pasty anarchist ass was over here getting peacefully arrested, like an idiot, I think that was a very educational set of movements for people who then later came up in the uprising. And a lot of the stuff that happened after the uprising to co-opted was predictable. I mean, a lot of it was predicted by radicals at the time. I even saw a couple lists going around being like, yeah, here's what's going to happen. And I checked back a year later and like everything on that list had happened exactly as predicted. I wrote the list. I just don't want to brag, but no, I should. So I think that a big part of it is just you get people who are more experienced in these movements and they gain that institutional knowledge, but then you have to make sure that you pass on that institutional knowledge to the new generation. And you need to make sure that those experienced people don't end up moving, like leaving the movements and then taking that institutional knowledge away, or you'll get people just falling for the same tricks over and over again. So yeah, I do think it's kind of a hard knock scenario. Like we collectively have to learn through experience, but I think we're well underway in doing that.
Two things. The first is that key to all of this is building team leadership. And I think that's one of the things that we're attempting to do with Workers' Solidarity Circle is over time getting to trust each other so that when push comes to shove and there's a sharp disagreement, you can come back again together to carry out whatever it is that you've agreed on without thinking that they're terrible or a sellout. And that's a real process. I mean, in our Delta Workers Organizing Drive, we actually have developed a core of tunnel-dwelling Viet Cong guerrilla fighters that things there's a little too much aerial bombardment going on, so they go back into the tunnel. They wait for that to go away. They get back up. They take another piece of territory. But that comes through very conscious efforts to build a team leadership where if you're thinking you're too special, you're kind of like, well, you have a choice. You can either start to move away from what we're doing, or you can change your orientation, because specialness is one of the things that sinks movements over and over again, as in ego, self-importance, etc. So being on the lookout for that. The other thing is just in terms of building a leadership that's capable of getting rid of capitalism. And by leadership, I mean that broadly, not like there's a little group of people who plan it out and then execute it. Talking about broad working class leadership, jobs like one of the things that happened with Black Lives Matter was a lot of the people who are leading that were, there's a lot of money for them, like they could, just like with the union bureaucracy, if you're willing to, kind of backpedal a little bit, soft sell it, then you can make a lot of money and have a nice, comfortable lifestyle and be the leader of something big and important. Not for long, but I mean, that is one of the factors that sunk the whole movement that broke out around George Floyd. Was a lot of those leaders have or had nice positions that came out of that. So that's like, somebody offers you a job around social rebellion, probably a good idea not to take it.
These guys are really smart. I got nothing else.
Next question right here.
So something that was really scary to me was viewing Project 2025 for the first time when I read through it. And I think when I had first heard about it, I was picturing the sort of just general hate that I often see on social media or whatever, where it's not even based on anything. It's just complete random sentences thrown together to sound scary. And when I was reading Project 2025 and I really realized how organized they were and how thoughtful they were in their evilness, and how they had whole organizations dedicated to how quickly can we dismantle these systems that are in our way from getting us to the thing that we want. And something else that's sort of frightening to me is the way that they all know the talking points. They all know where they're going. They have like a plan on where they're headed. And I feel like something that happens in these spaces that I've been occupying is the infighting between us can get so intense, and we don't really have like a clear place on where we're going. I remember being in discussions during like the BLM where it was like, well, we know that we're really angry and we need things to change, but then there wasn't necessarily how do we make these institutions that allow this to stop happening. And I was wondering if you guys knew of anyone who's sort of trying to do that part of the work. So not the organizing part of the work, but what our big picture goals are, and more of a solid plan amongst us, or if that doesn't even have a place in our movement because we need to be more flexible and we need to be more democratic. Yeah.
I'll start, I guess. It's a big question, and I'm trying to formulate my thoughts as I go, but I don't personally know. I even general strikes demands, when we look at the national list of demands, we're kind of like, whoa, okay, I'm not sure how all of that goes together all at one time, even though I agree with each of those things. To call a strike, until all of this is done, I don't know that we would ever come back. So I'm interested to know if these folks have an idea about who is doing that, but I think you're right to identify that we're often fighting what we hate and not building what we want, and that's a focus that we could be kind of maybe transitioning toward.
So the gist of what you're asking is, how do we build long-term positive vision that can inspire millions of people, and who's doing that? I mean, I would say it's a process. Like, for example, I think back to, again, I wasn't alive then, but in 1934, the union movement was trying to get itself together. The working class people had been just atomized by the Great Depression, and along came what they called three strikes that paved the way. One was the Minneapolis Teamsters strike, where revolutionary socialists really were at the core of building a movement and a strike and a union that took the bosses on, took them on with beating the crap out of cops in the street. And there's photographs of that. and they took on the ruling class of Minneapolis and they won. The same thing happened in San Francisco with the general strike there, and the same thing with the Toledo Autolite general strike in Toledo, Ohio. And all of a sudden, the question of occupations, sit-down strikes, using direct action to stop the police from breaking your picket line, all started to become popular. And in 1933, that really was not something that was on the agenda. Just like now, I would say with Mamdani, there's a pretty clear formula that working class people, multinational, multiracial groups of workers can unite around a program that fights against the high cost of living, against for affordability. So any politician that's not watching that, any movement that's not watching that, so all of a sudden that's on the agenda. Is like in different cities, it'll look a little bit differently, but if we're not like, there's our visionary goal, is whether you're in St. Louis, Austin, Texas, Oklahoma City, rent is probably a big problem. The cost of food is probably a big problem. Transportation probably sucks. Childcare is probably terrible. I mean, in some cities, it's environmental issues where people are literally dying from the breezes blowing the poisonous stuff from a chemical plant in Baton Rouge over into your house. So that kind of boldness, and not around like, one of the things that I think we're finally starting to get to is that on the one hand, you have to have a movement that's willing to fight like unequivocally for like there can be no misogyny in your movement, and if there is, then that has to be like pushed down and dealt with. There can be no racial or anti-immigrant feeling in your in your movement. But then the other part of that is that all of us have to unite to fight for those very clear, bold demands, because if we try and do it like, I'm going to fight you with my finger, I'm going to poke your eyes out. But if I come up to you and I say, I'm going to punch you square in the face and knock you down, you have a lot more power. So that's to me, that's one of the big lessons of especially the last few years, but certainly all of working class history, is to go like that, then you really are talking about something, as opposed to, well, I can give you the finger. So, yeah.
I think that the modern left, much like the left historically, has, if anything, a superabundance of prospective models and ideas and courses of action that people are suggesting. I think anytime I've been to a picket line, I've had 3 or 4 newspapers shoved in my face that have several different courses of action that people want me to follow. And that's not new, and it's not great either. I mean, it's always been a problem on the left, but it's never been necessarily a problem that destroys the left. It's good to have a lot of different ideas on how to get things done. I think that kind of dialogue is actually really healthy, but oftentimes it can be the case that, for example, you have a party of 12 people that has an entire political platform that they have no ability to get into power whatsoever. There's a lot of like people playing shadow cabinet a lot of the time. It's a favorite like left sect pastime, is pretending that you're in government and then acting as shadow cabinet. And that said, there's like some really interesting projects that are going on, kind of exploring new ground, and I think that that's important work. There's Cooperation Jackson, for example, which has spread to several other cities. I think there's now a Cooperation Tulsa, Cooperation Milwaukee. Sadly, not a Cooperation Minneapolis yet. Here's hoping. And they're very plugged into like a couple of different ideas, from like black autonomy to sort of cooperativism and counter economics to social ecology and libertarian municipalism, which is this idea that comes out of like Bookchin and that wing of the anarchist movement, which is actually itself potentially fairly congruent with some of the possibilities that these like local socialist mayoral elections open up, is that we could have these sort of rebel municipalities of more left wing cities. Sort of resisting the federal government. The DSA caucuses, each of them has a platform for what they're trying to get into office. So there's all sorts of these ideas bouncing around, and I think that's a good thing. I think that the way to avoid that becoming destructive infighting is that we have to have a commitment to coalitional politics, and that when we're in coalitional politics with other groups, that we treat that with the respect that it deserves. So, for example, Black Hat Workers Collective and the DSA are both members of Workers' Solidarity Circle. And one of the ways that Workers' Solidarity Circle works is that we both understand that neither of our organizations nor our other partner, Red Pine, are trying to dominate Workers' Solidarity Circle and make it their front group, right? If anyone was trying to do that, the other two would probably leave. And we understand that we're stronger together, so we're not trying to do that. And so I think if you are able to embrace the idea that our movement needs to be largely democratic and coalitional, and get rid of the idea that your party needs to dictate to the movement what's going to go on, that gives us a lot stronger room for better movements.
Question over here.
Hey everyone, I'm an introvert, so I'm going to try and formulate this question properly, but this comes from Laura's moment in the Capitol where she felt not welcome there. And for me, I saw myself in that moment where I'm new to organizing, I'm new to political movements, but I spent most of my adult life reading political theory. And I'm now trying to organize a sharing space in my apartment. I'm trying to recognize why I had learned to be helpless for so long and what stories made me feel so small. Reflecting, I remember a time where I was shameful to be an American because I was disgusted by what our government was doing both abroad and at home. And I'm recognizing that that's the wrong message for everyone. And everyone that I've been talking to, I've been hearing something similar. People I've talked to have said democracy is dead, and what can we do if the politicians aren't fighting for us, right? And so my question to you all is, what does it mean to be American to you? That's my question.
Yeah, I'll start off because this is actually something that I've thought about, and I've thought about it kind of from the same view as you, which is I was a baggage handler. You don't even see us. Like when you travel, you do not see us unless you look out and because you're by where they're loading the bags, and you say, "That's my bag. How come he put that down so rough?" And the mechanics at the airline call us knuckle draggers, because we're not skilled, although we actually are quite skilled in getting your flight out on time with all the different things that have to go into it. But we think of ourselves generally as so much shit until we start to organize together and realize that we're actually incredibly powerful and that we draw strength from that. And if you're a worker in a meatpacking plant in Worthington, Minnesota, you probably feel the same way. Like, all I am is a worthless cog, and I can't wait to get out of this and maybe do something different, or at least, rest my body a little bit. And that's the condition of the vast majority of working class people in the United States, that they just think, well, this is my life. And until they start to feel their, it's kind of like the song Solidarity Forever, when the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun, something that Emmett has sung very well many times. And maybe we can end this meeting with him leading us in that. So that's the lens that I look at being an American through. So whose history am I claiming? That's the bottom line. Like, I don't know if you've ever read the book People's History of the United States. It's a pretty interesting book. There's some problems here and there with it, but overall it's pretty interesting because it's all the stuff you never learned in school. And so you start to, okay, so the history I claim is when white indentured servants, black slaves, and indigenous people in Georgia, or is it? I think it was Georgia, got together and overthrew the system for a little while. So that's what I claim. I claim the working class resistance of black working class people in Selma, Alabama, who marched and got their heads beaten in. That's part of my history. That's what makes me proud to be an American, so-called. My history is like my dad told me, because he was in World War II. He was in Manila at the end of the war, and there was a whole giant movement that you have never heard about. I'm sure that this is true. It was called Bring the Troops Home Now movement. And the United States military wanted to send them to China to crush the Chinese Revolution and the Korean and the Vietnamese, etc. And the troops said, we beat fascism, so we're going home now. And they had 250,000 GIs in Manila in 1945 say, we're not fighting anymore. That's my history. Like, that's anti-imperialism to the max. Or my friends who went to Vietnam and they, because I just barely missed going there myself, who would go out on patrol and they'd fire their weapons into the air so that it would look like they were doing something and they had expended shells. And the Viet Cong wouldn't mess with them because they knew they weren't out there to fight. Like, it was the collapse of the U.S. Army because the U.S. Army wouldn't fight anymore. That's my history. So that's how I look at myself as an American, is that we have one of the richest histories of resistance on so many levels of any country in the world. Let's claim that shit and not the other part of it that is Trump and Clinton and Carter and Kamala Harris and all the rest of them who wouldn't know real history if it hit them in the face.
Yeah, that was very eloquent and more or less in line with how I approach being an American. Certainly when I think of things in my community's history or my family's history that I'm proud of, I have an uncle who was a very prolific draft office burner during the Vietnam War. My father was an activist against apartheid, my grandparents for civil rights. So that's a legacy that I feel the weight of our country's history weighing on me very heavily. As well as being the inheritor of all the horrors of our country. I grew up on land where we routinely found arrowheads in our fields because the farm that I grew up on, the creek that runs through it, was once the border of the temporary reservation the Ho-Chunk people were put on before being deported further out onto the Great Plains. And of course, we're in the state where the infamous case was won. I forget, was it Dred Scott decision that ruled that even when they come to the north, that enslaved people remain the property of their masters, so-called masters. And but we're also a country that has the legacy of those plantations burning and of that enslaved people being the first to launch a general strike in American history. So I think that there is a great tradition of resistance, but I think that also we need to celebrate that tradition of resistance both within this country and outside of it, because I don't really view myself as an American so much as a citizen of industry. And increasingly, globalization is making that not just a moral statement, but a very material statement. I work in construction, and right now the white workers in construction are being whipped up into a scapegoating frenzy against Latino workers on the idea that Latino workers are undercutting our wages. Now, the truth is, if you work in residential construction, that undocumented immigrant workers are in fact being used to undercut your wages. That is happening. It's not their fault. What is at fault here is generations of colonial policy in Latin America arresting the development of that continent and keeping those people poor and desperate. It is the destabilization of governments in Latin America by American death squads. It is the funding of fascist and coup governments across the continent that have continued to immiserate their people and sell out both their people and their landscapes to American corporations. And that's why we have, for example, Honduran people coming up and working on roofing crews in the Twin Cities, and therefore, affecting my leverage as a carpenter on the wages I could ask for. So in a very real and very material sense, the struggles of workers anywhere in the world are my struggles, especially as a blue-collar worker, and increasingly for white-collar workers, because their jobs are under threat as the workforce in the global south is increasingly educated and technically competent. So it's just really just a basic material fact at this point that if you want to win as the working class, you have to be internationalist. Thank you.
How does anyone speak after you two? They have so many good examples, and I think the only thing I want to add is that besides not really believing in borders and countries and that we're all these, land back for real, but the duality that exists with this mythology that can kind of unite us but is a little bit fictional. People still want to believe in this kind of go get 'em America type vibe, but also knowing these histories that there are so many examples of atrocities that are the foundation of where we exist right now, that I think being able to hold both things is what it means to be American to me right now, and to say, like, I'm going to unflinchingly face the realities and also dream about and work for the things that do unite us, that we believe are possible, because some people believe the lies that they already exist, that we have these values as Americans and whatnot that are worth kind of rallying behind, and that how can we actually create a country we can be proud of if a country has to exist. I think that to me is I'm also struggling with what it means to me to be an American, especially right now, and I think of myself as a future elder a lot, because I really want to be able to talk about this time in the past, and right now it's not. So how are we creating the stories we'll be proud of now that we can tell in the future about how we got through this and how we existed at this time here?
I want to take my moderator prerogative real quick to give a quick answer that is very important to me, which is that I've come to realize that there isn't like an American Revolution and a Russian Revolution and a Spanish Revolution. There's just like the revolution that humanity has been going through for the last 250, 300 years, and that we're as much inheritors of it as, the Spanish were the inheritors of the Russians were the inheritors of the Americans were the inheritors of the English. And that the American flag used to be a symbol of rebellion and of independence, and not like shitty, just me independence, but like freedom, right? And that I think it's going to be very, very hard to organize a movement in the United States that shits on the American flag, across the board, because a lot of people won't understand why you're doing that, and will see America as a revolutionary society, and that I think we benefit from entertaining that perspective, that our revolution is flawed and has taken backward steps and side steps and gone all sorts of weird directions, but that in a lot of ways, as Emmett was talking about and Kip was talking about, that there is this like deep grassroots spirit of resistance in the United States that the ruling class has to work unbelievably hard to continuously repress, and that like that's what America should be, not the accidents of history, but the spirit of the people fighting for their freedom and equality and all of that. We'll have time for one more question, I believe.
Knowing we only have about 10 minutes left, I wanted to see if the last question I could ask would be something that encourage us all as we leave. So obviously we're all here because we care about the world being on fire at the moment, and we all want to do something about it. And the three of you seem very actively involved in doing something about it. In the last few years, we've all seen the rise of like therapy speak and self-care and this and that, and being able to like disengage for your own mental health. And I think it may have come to a point where people are using that as a reason to not participate in making the world better. And so I wanted to hear from each of you, as much as we can within the time that we have left. How do you balance your own wellness and health while maintaining the drive to make the changes so that when we do become the future elders that we will be, we can look back and be proud of what we did while also not burning ourselves out?
I think it was Audre Lorde that said that self-care is a revolutionary act. Audre Lorde was a lesbian black woman. I'm not. So me taking care of myself. Sorry, Jessica. Me taking care of myself is maybe less of an important revolutionary act, because my existence is not being constantly shit on and threatened by the systems that we live in. That said, so I think that is a little, a little bit tongue in cheek, but really sometimes when people, within what I sort of jokingly call the therapy left, get a little too much on their high horse about the importance of self-care, you might want to ask them if their work that they're doing really justifies the amount of self-care that they feel is necessary, because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. And there's a lot of our comrades who don't take enough care of themselves. I've been one a lot throughout my life. So I do think that you need to have a very accurate assessment of your own capacity. I think it's useful to do an audit of all the things you're committing to every once in a while, and make sure that you are not overcommitting, and that if you are overcommitting, that you figure out how to delegate some of those tasks to other people and refocus. Especially people who are in their first big wave of being an activist, they're inevitably going to hit that burnout phase, and before the burnout phase, there's going to be the overcommitment phase. You can make that less bad if you take my advice and audit your obligations and figure out what you actually want to do. Pick one or two lanes and just do those. And you have to trust in other people to do the rest of the work, which is hard because other people are wrong a lot of the times. But then as you do it more, you realize that you're also wrong a lot of the times, and you'll be less wrong if you get really good at like one or two specific areas of work and then steward yourself carefully in that work. And make sure you do have time in your life for hobbies, for friendships, and not just friendships on the left. You should like keep people around in your life who can tell you when you sound fucking insane. Because we all do sometimes to normal people. So yeah, I guess that would be my advice. Have a hobby, keep in your lane, choose where to spend your energy, and take care of yourself, but like don't go nuts about it. Don't get all on your high horse about how important your care work is. Maybe it is, but if you're like Audre Lorde, maybe. I'm not.
I started making a list in my phone of projects I'm working on just so I can make sure I'm checking in with stuff. And at about item 7, I was like, this might be a problem.
That's something that I've dealt with for literally decades, and it's an extremely important question. To like what I have done as an escape valve is make sure that I walk in the woods or some facsimile of that uh, almost every single day, because and whatever it is that you have to do, whether it's a walk in the woods, maybe it's going and playing tennis, or go to the Y and swimming, whatever. Because, like I said before, one of the ruling classes' biggest, that they have an advantage in that they can exert unrelenting pressure on you for as long as we all let them. Um, so that unrelenting pressure, and I've seen this time and time again, where people make bad decisions because they start to get crushed by that pressure because they think it's the KIP movement and not the working class movement. That it all rests on my shoulders and not on and realize that I could get hit by a car tomorrow and killed, and the movement would still go on. So even if you're an important leader of a movement, you're not that important. So realizing where you fit in terms of, like, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is Nelson Mandela when he was addressing Congress after he got out of prison. And he's talking to all these, the Senate, like rich people, almost all white, and almost all men. And they think they're really important. And he says, I am but a single grain of sand in the history of my people. And I thought, okay, I want to take that in my heart, that I'm a single grain of sand in the struggle of my people being working class people, which also means it's like humble. You got to have some humility to survive. So that's and team leadership, having people. I mean, I got some really smart people that I like. I mean, I talk to Emmett, I read his stuff, and it makes me think. Like, and there's other people like that, and that's part of team leadership, is having people that you trust and and that you can bounce things off of, and they can tell you, boy, Kip, that's like the dumbest idea I've heard in a long time. So.
I know we're almost done, but I'm so passionate about your question. My second passion besides farming is teaching farmers about self-care, because our job is so punishing and never ending. So I know we're almost up. Okay. I mean, we have book recommendations. I want to add, Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hersey. If you haven't already heard of it or read it, please take that in, because it is a really good meditation on your question. Also, Amnesty International has a guide to sustainable activism that is multiple pages with advice and tools, self inventories that you can take. It's a tool that I bring to all my wellness teaching spaces. And I forgot the last one, because I really just want to give you those resources, and I know we're almost out of time. Oh, the concept of balance is something I teach to farmers a lot, and I think that we struggle with the same thing. Is balance is something we think we can achieve, as like we will finally balance our life and our work and our activism and stuff. But I like to think about the image of balancing on a balance beam or balancing a pen on your finger is actually a state of constant motion. You're always making little adjustments to try to keep that balance in a realm that is manageable, and you're never going to be perfectly balanced. So just do what you need when you can, and people will reference the choir, that you can hold a single note as long as possible when there's multiple voices, because we're all taking breaks to breathe when we need it. And I think those together sum up what I have to say, unless you want to hang out and talk for hours later, because I will totally do that.
All right, let's give our panelists a round of applause. So we have a social hour after New Bohemia. Emily went over to get us some space, but no rush to get over there if y'all want to stay and chat for a little bit. We have this room till 5, so no rush to get out, although we will start putting chairs away and stuff. Anybody who hasn't had a chance, we have some business cards over on the table, and we have our newsletter sign up. We also have our donation box. If you have any cash, or if you have a digital donation you'd like to make, there's some QR codes over there. They'd be greatly appreciated. I just want to thank the panelists again. I guess Kip had to run. 2 hours of sitting is understandable. But yeah, again, we encourage all of you to join us at the social at New Bohemia just down the street afterwards, and to check out our website for other events like this. We hope to have another similar panel in 2-3 months, and keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for coming, and thanks again to the library for hosting and giving us the space. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for ushering us through this day.